The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles as I trudged through the thick underbrush, my backpack pressing into my shoulders. The sun had just dipped behind the mountains, leaving the sky a fading shade of orange and purple. I had hiked nearly 10 miles deep into the forest, further than most people dared to go. But that was exactly what I wanted: solitude. I found a small clearing near a sluggish stream, perfect for setting up camp. The place was untouched, no signs of previous campers, just the whisper of the wind through the trees and the occasional chirp of crickets. I set my backpack down, stretched my aching legs, and got to work. First, I gathered rocks to make a fire ring, then set up my small one-person tent. The forest floor was uneven, but I found a decent spot with just enough flat ground to sleep comfortably. With the tent done, I scoured the area for firewood, breaking apart fallen branches and gathering enough to last me through the night. I always liked my fires big. There was something about that warm glow in the middle of the dark woods that made me feel safe. By the time the fire crackled to life, darkness had settled in fully. The woods were alive with night sounds, but nothing unusual, just the normal rustling of small animals in the brush, the distant hoot of an owl. I cooked a quick meal over the fire, just some canned beans and jerky, then leaned back against my pack, staring at the flames. The quiet felt heavy, thick in a way I hadn't noticed before. I chalked it up to exhaustion and let the warmth lull me into relaxation. After some time, I crawled into my tent, zipped myself in, and listened to the fire outside pop and crack. My body ached from the long hike, and sleep came fast. A sound woke me, not a normal forest sound, not wind, not an animal. It was a dull, rhythmic thud, faint but steady. I blinked in the darkness, my breath slow and controlled, ears straining to hear. The fire outside had burned down to embers, casting just enough light through the tent walls to make out vague shapes. The sound wasn't close, but it was near enough that I knew it wasn't just my imagination. Thud, 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 like footsteps, heavy ones. I told myself it was a deer, maybe a bear. I reached for the knife I kept beside me, gripping the handle tight. The sound stopped. Silence stretched. I stayed like that, frozen for what felt like an hour. Eventually, my body relaxed again, convincing myself I was being paranoid. I let out a breath, loosened my grip on the knife, and closed my eyes. Sleep came and went in uneasy waves. Every small noise outside made me tense up. When morning finally arrived, I was exhausted. I crawled out of the tent, blinking in the pale morning light. The fire had completely died out. The forest was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Usually, mornings were filled with birdsong, but today, there was nothing, just an eerie stillness. I shook it off and made coffee over the camp stove, but the feeling of unease clung to me. I decided to stay put another night despite the weirdness. Maybe I was just spooking myself. I had come out here to be alone, to get away from everything, and I wasn't going to let a bad night chase me off. The day passed slowly. I wandered the area, following the stream for a while, checking my bearings on the map. There were no trails nearby. This was deep, remote forest. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I built the fire bigger than the night before. The warmth helped, and I forced myself to shake off the creeping paranoia. I ate my dinner, sipped whiskey from my flask, and stared at the flames until my eyes grew heavy. Then, just as I was about to turn in, I noticed something. The woods were too quiet again.
No crickets, no owls.
No rustling in the trees, just the sound of the fire cracking. I sat up straighter, scanning the dark tree line. My pulse thudded in my ears. Then I heard it. Thud, thud, thud. The same slow, heavy footsteps from the night before. But this time they were closer. My mouth went dry. I reached for my knife, the firelight dancing on the blade. I couldn't see anything beyond the glow of the fire, but I felt something watching me. Then I saw it. Not a bear, not a deer, a shape in the trees, tall, human, standing just beyond the firelight, motionless. I didn't breathe. My fingers tightened on the knife. The figure didn't move, just stood there watching. I wanted to call out, to demand who they were, but my voice wouldn't work. My body screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place. Then, in the blink of an eye, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees. No sound, no crunch of leaves, just gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against a tree, my knife in one hand, a burning stick in the other. My mind raced, thinking of every possible explanation. Maybe another hiker? A hunter? But why would they be out here this deep with no light, no gear? And why just stand there? The first light, I packed up and left. My body ached from tension and lack of sleep, but I moved fast, checking over my shoulder every few steps. I hiked nonstop, not even pausing for water until I reached my car. When I finally locked the doors behind me, I sat there, hands shaking. As I drove away, I kept expecting to see something in the trees, a shadow watching from the edge of the forest. But I never did, and I never went back. I should have never gone on that trip. It started off simple. My plan was to go camping alone in the mountains. I had been wanting to do a solo trip for a while, just to get away from everything. People, work, the constant noise of everyday life. I wanted some real quiet, just me, my tent, a campfire, and the sounds of nature. It was supposed to be peaceful. The place I chose wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot. It was deep in the wilderness, far from any established campgrounds. I wanted isolation. The nearest town was about an hour away by car, and once I got there, I had to take a dirt road that went up into the mountains. The road was rough, barely maintained, and my truck struggled over some of the bigger rocks and dips. Eventually, I found a small clearing near a stream. It looked perfect. Flat ground, enough space for my tent and fire, and just close enough to the water to have a steady supply. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and got everything ready before dark. The sun was just starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees. The forest felt alive with the sounds of birds and insects. It was exactly what I wanted. The first night was uneventful. I made a small fire, cooked some food, and sat there enjoying the silence. The sky was clear, filled with stars. No city lights, no cars, just me and the wilderness. Felt perfect. The first thing that felt off happened in the middle of the night. I woke up suddenly, not sure why. The fire had burned down to just embers, and everything was pitch black outside. I lay there listening. There was a sound, something moving through the trees. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer. The sound wasn't loud, just the occasional rustling of leaves. Eventually, it stopped, and I went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to go exploring. I wanted to see if there were any trails nearby. I packed some water, a knife, and my small camping axe, just in case I needed to cut through any thick brush. I walked for a couple of hours, not really going anywhere specific, just looking around and enjoying the scenery. Then I found something strange. It was a small clearing, not far from where I had set up camp. In the middle of the clearing was a fire pit, long since burned out. Surrounding it were the remains of some kind of makeshift shelter. Branches leaned together, like someone had tried to build a small hut. But what really bothered me were the bones. Scattered around the fire pit were animal bones, some small, some larger. A few looked like they had been deliberately broken. I felt uneasy. This place was remote, but it wasn't impossible that other people had camped here before. Still, something about it didn't sit right with me. The shelter looked abandoned, like it hadn't been used in a long time, but the bones looked fresher. I turned around and went back to my campsite. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept thinking about that fire pit, the bones. Had someone stayed there recently? Were they still nearby? As I sat by my fire, I felt exposed. The darkness beyond the trees felt different now, heavier. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the shadows. Nothing, just my paranoia. I barely slept that night. Every small noise put me on edge. A branch snapping in the distance, leaves rustling, normal forest sounds, but now they felt wrong. I kept my knife close, just in case. The third day, I decided to leave. Something felt off about the whole area, and I didn't want to push my luck. I packed up my gear quickly, trying to shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. They weren't mine. They were fresh, leading from the edge of my campsite to where I had been sleeping. They circled my tent. Whoever had made them had been there while I slept. I didn't waste any more time. I threw my stuff in my truck and got the hell out of there. The road down the mountain felt longer than before, every turn making me feel like someone might be following me. When I finally made it back to town, I stopped at a gas station, trying to calm myself down. As I was filling up, an older man walked over to me. He looked like a local, maybe a hunter. "Been up in the mountains?" he asked casually. I nodded. "Yeah, just a few days of camping." He looked at my truck, still covered in dust from the dirt road. "Where at?" I told him the general area. His expression changed slightly, just for a moment, before he nodded. "Not a lot of people go up there." "Yeah, I noticed." I hesitated, then added, "Have you ever seen anything strange out there?" The man shrugged. "Depends what you mean by strange." I thought about telling him everything, the fire pit, the bones, the footprints, but something told me not to. Instead, I just said, "I think I had a visitor at my campsite." The man was quiet for a moment, then said, "Best not to camp alone up there." He didn't say anything else, just walked back to his truck and drove off. I never went back. I remember every detail of that night like it's burned into my brain. The smell of damp earth, the crunch of dead leaves under my boots, the way the cold air made my breath come out in thick clouds. I had decided to go on a solo camping trip, something I had done before and felt comfortable with. It was supposed to be a weekend of peace, away from work, people, and the constant noise of the city. Just me, my tent, and the quiet of the wilderness. The spot I chose was about 10 miles deep into a national forest, far from any designated campgrounds. I had checked the weather, packed my gear, and followed the trail up until it disappeared into thick trees. From there, I used a map and compass to find a clearing near a small creek. It was perfect. No signs of other campers, no trash, no footprints, just untouched land. The kind of place where the only sounds were the occasional rustle of branches and the distant call of an owl. I set up my tent near the creek, gathered some firewood, and got a small fire going before the sun dipped below the trees. Dinner was simple, dehydrated camping food, but I didn't care. The peace of being out there, alone with nature, made up for any lack of luxury. After eating, I sat by the fire and listened to the night. The forest around me was alive in a way that the city never was. Tiny creatures scurried through the underbrush. Insects hummed. The wind whispered through the trees. It was peaceful, at least at first. It was sometime after midnight when I woke up. The fire had died down to glowing embers, but I wasn't cold. I wasn't even sure why I woke up. Just that uneasy feeling, like something was off. I lay still in my sleeping bag, listening. The forest was quiet, too quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. The usual sounds, crickets, rustling leaves, distant owl calls were gone. Then I heard it, a single snap, a branch breaking underfoot. Not the sound of a falling branch, not something natural. This was deliberate, controlled. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I told myself it was probably an animal. A deer, maybe. A raccoon. Something harmless. But my gut told me otherwise. The sound had come from the tree line, maybe 20 feet away. Too close. I strained my ears, listening for anything else. Nothing. Then another sound. A low, steady exhale. Not mine. Not an animal. Someone was out there. My heart was pounding now. My backpack, where I kept my knife and flashlight, was just outside the tent. I cursed myself for not bringing it inside before I went to sleep. Slowly, carefully, I shifted onto my side and reached for the zipper of my tent. I moved it millimeter by millimeter, trying to be as quiet as possible. Another breath. Closer this time. I froze. Whoever was out there, they weren't moving. They were just standing, listening, watching. My hand was shaking as I finally got the zipper down enough to slip out. The air outside was freezing, and the dying embers of my fire cast weak shadows on the ground. I could see my backpack just a foot away. I grabbed it and slowly pulled it toward me, keeping my eyes on the tree line. Then the breathing stopped. Silence. Heavy. Waiting. I held my breath and listened. Then, from deeper in the woods, another sound. Not a breath this time. A whisper. Low. Indistinct. Impossible to tell what was being said. I could barely process it. There was more than one person. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But run where? Into the darkness, where I could trip, fall, get lost? I fumbled for my flashlight and knife. I clicked the light on and aimed it at the tree line. Nothing, just trees, branches, and darkness. The whispering had stopped, but the feeling remained. That crawling sensation at the back of my neck, like unseen eyes were locked onto me. Then movement. A figure darted between the trees, too fast for me to get a clear look. My blood turned to ice. I stood there, gripping my knife so hard my knuckles ached. Then, without thinking, I did the only thing that made sense. I shouted, "Who's there?" No answer. I wasn't expecting one. I backed toward my tent, flashlight scanning the woods. My brain was running 1,000 miles a minute, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just some lost hiker, maybe. Then the whispering started again. Closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, tore down my tent in record time, stuffed everything into my pack, and left. I didn't care if it was dark. I didn't care if I got lost. Staying was not an option. I hiked for hours, heart hammering, flashlight flickering. Every snap of a branch made me whip around, knife in hand. But I never saw them again. By the time the sun rose, I had found the main trail. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car. I threw my gear inside, locked the doors, and sat there, shaking. I never went back to that forest. Never told anyone the full story. Because what could I even say? That someone or something had been watching me, whispering to me in the dark. I don't know what their intentions were. I don't want to know. But I do know one thing. I was not alone out there. And whoever they were, they wanted me to know it. I never used to be afraid of the woods. Growing up in a small town, surrounded by nothing but trees and hills, the outdoors felt like home. Camping, hiking, fishing, I loved all of it. But after what happened last summer, I don't think I'll ever set foot in the woods alone again. It started as a simple solo camping trip. I had been stressed from work and needed a break from people, phones, and the constant noise of everyday life. I picked a spot deep in the state forest, a place I had camped before but never alone. It was far from any main roads or designated campsites, which was exactly what I wanted. Total isolation. Just me, my tent, and nature. I parked my truck at the closest trailhead and hiked in about 5 miles. The spot was perfect. A small clearing near a slow-moving creek, surrounded by towering pines. The only sounds were the occasional chirp of birds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I set up camp, started a small fire, and cooked a simple meal. Everything was perfect. The first night was uneventful. I listened to the crackling fire, stared at the stars, and felt completely at peace. The woods at night were calm, the kind of quiet that makes you feel small in the best way. I eventually crawled into my tent and fell asleep almost immediately. The second day, I explored the area a bit, following the creek deeper into the forest. I found old animal tracks, a few downed trees, and plenty of signs that no one had been out there for a while. That feeling of isolation was exactly what I wanted. I spent the day fishing, cooking, and just enjoying the silence. That night, though, something felt off. It was around midnight when I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the air was cool but not uncomfortable. Then I heard it, a faint snapping sound, like a twig breaking underfoot. I held my breath and listened. It wasn't just one sound. There were several, slow and deliberate, coming from the treeline about 20 yards away. My heart started pounding. Could have been a deer, maybe a raccoon, but something about it felt wrong. The sounds weren't random. They were spaced out, like careful footsteps. I sat up slowly, straining to see into the darkness. My fire was too low to light up the trees, and my flashlight was in my backpack outside the tent. I cursed myself for not keeping it closer. The footsteps stopped, and for a few minutes, everything was silent. I told myself it was an animal and forced myself to lie back down. But then I heard breathing. Not the distant snort of a deer or the chuff of a bear. It was close, human, slow, controlled, and deliberate. My blood ran cold. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. My mind raced through my options. My knife was in the tent with me, but my bear spray and gun were outside, strapped to my pack. If I made a move, whoever was out there would hear me. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The breathing eventually stopped. Then more footsteps moving away this time. Slow, measured, fading into the forest. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping my knife and staring at the tent flap, waiting for something to happen. When dawn finally came, I unzipped my tent as quietly as possible and scanned the area. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to prove someone had been there. I told myself I had imagined it, that maybe it had been a dream. But deep down, I knew better. I should have left right then. But I didn't. Instead, I convinced myself to stay one more night. I was probably just paranoid. Maybe it really was just an animal. I spent the day gathering firewood and keeping myself busy, trying to shake the unease from the night before. But as the sun started to set, that feeling crept back in. I wasn't alone. That night, I kept my gun inside the tent with me. The fire was bigger this time, casting more light. I forced myself to stay awake as long as I could, listening for anything unusual. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, just as I started to doze off, I heard something outside my tent. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Close. I gripped my gun, my hands sweaty. Then something pressed against the tent wall. Just a light touch, barely noticeable, but I felt it. Someone was right outside, just standing there, listening. I've never been so scared in my life. I waited, heart hammering, unsure what to do. Then, as suddenly as it came, the presence was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I packed up my gear faster than I ever had before. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just threw everything into my pack, doused the fire, and started hiking back to my truck. Every step I felt watched. Every sound made me jump. When I finally reached my truck, I tossed my pack in the back and locked the doors the second I got inside. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I drove out of there faster than I should have, not stopping until I was miles away. I never told anyone what happened. Not really, just said I cut the trip short. But I know what I felt. Someone was out there watching me, and the worst part, they never made a move, never attacked, just watched, waited, and that somehow was even worse. I never thought much about the fear that comes with being alone in the woods at night. The quiet, the darkness, it never bothered me before. I grew up camping, spending nights under the stars, listening to the sounds of the forest. But this time was different. This time I was truly alone. It started as a weekend trip, just me and the wilderness. I wanted a break from everything, work, social media, the constant noise of life. I found a remote camping spot deep in the national forest, miles from any town. The trail wasn't marked, but I had studied the maps and packed everything I needed. Food, water, my tent, and some basic survival gear. I even carried a firearm just in case. Not that I expected trouble, but you never know what you might run into out there. The hike in was peaceful. The sun filtered through the trees, the air was crisp, and the scent of pines surrounded me. I followed an old logging road, barely more than a faint path now, overgrown in places. It was obvious no one had been down there in a while. I had to push through branches and step over fallen logs, but I didn't mind. That was the point. Being away from people, away from everything. I reached a small clearing by a creek and set up camp. My tent was simple but reliable, and I had a fire going before the sun dipped too low. Cooking a quick meal over the flames, I leaned back against my pack, just listening. The forest was alive with sounds. Birds, insects, the rustling of leaves in the wind. Felt right. The first night was uneventful. I slept well, waking only once to the distant sound of an animal moving through the undergrowth. Probably a deer. I had seen tracks earlier. I wasn't worried. The next day, I spent my time exploring. I followed the creek for a while, looking for signs of wildlife. There were plenty deer tracks, small burrows, even claw marks on a tree from a black bear sharpening its claws. I had seen plenty of bears before, though. They usually wanted nothing to do with people. By late afternoon, I started heading back to camp. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest felt different, quieter. The usual sounds, the chirping of birds, the occasional rustling had faded. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I was just imagining it. But as I got closer to camp, I felt watched. I felt that before, but usually because I knew something was actually there. A coyote, a bear, something real. This was different. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't paranoia, but a deep, unsettling feeling that made the hairs on my arms stand up. When I got back, my campsite looked the same. My tent was still there, my gear untouched. The fire pit was as I left it, but the feeling didn't go away. I ate my dinner in silence, glancing up every few seconds, scanning the trees. I had my firearm next to me within reach just in case. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me sit up. Every gust of wind sent a spike of unease through me. It wasn't normal. I had been in the woods alone before, but this was something else. Something wasn't right. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke suddenly, my heart pounding. It was dead silent outside. Too silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. I sat up slowly, listening. Then, from somewhere in the distance, I heard it. A snapping sound, like a branch breaking underfoot. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. Maybe 50 yards out? Hard to tell in the dark. My hand tightened around my gun. I didn't move, just listened. Another snap. Closer this time. Slow. Deliberate. Not an animal running through the brush. Something moving carefully, step by step. I sat there for what felt like hours, barely breathing. But eventually the sound stopped. Nothing else happened. No more snapping branches, no movement. Just silence. I stayed awake until dawn, listening, watching, waiting. When the sun finally came up, I stepped outside, gun in hand. I walked the perimeter of my campsite, looking for tracks. And I found them. Footprints. Human footprints. They circled my campsite. I froze. My stomach twisted. The prints weren't mine. I had been careful, keeping my movements contained to one area. These prints were fresh, made sometime in the night, and they weren't running or stumbling. They were walking. I followed them for a bit, but they disappeared into the underbrush. Whoever it was, they had been watching me, standing out there in the dark, just beyond the firelight. I packed my gear in minutes. I didn't care about breakfast, didn't care about staying another night. I was done. The hike back felt different. Every sound made my heart race. Every shift of the trees had me glancing over my shoulder. But I saw no one. I didn't stop, didn't rest. I just walked. The whole way back, I felt that same feeling, the one I had the night before. Someone was watching me. I was sure of it. I made it back to my truck by early afternoon, tossed my gear in the back, and got in. The second the doors were locked, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I peeled out of there faster than I probably should have. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted. Maybe they were just some hermit living off the grid. Maybe it was something worse. I try not to think about it, but I haven't been camping alone since, and I don't think I ever will again. I don't know why I thought camping alone in the woods was a good idea. Maybe it was the need to disconnect, to get away from the city noise, the endless notifications, the pressure of daily life. I had camped before, but always with friends or family. This time, I wanted solitude. I wanted to feel the raw quiet of nature with nothing but the trees and the wind. I picked a spot deep in the national forest, miles away from any roads. I parked my truck at the nearest trailhead and hiked in about 5 miles with my gear. The further I went, the quieter it became. The only sounds were my boots crunching against the dirt path and the occasional rustle of leaves from small animals skittering away. Felt good at first, peaceful. By late afternoon, I found a flat clearing near a small stream. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and made a small fire. It was perfect. The air was crisp, the scent of pine thick, and the warmth of the fire comforting. I cooked a simple meal, ate in silence, and watched the sun dip behind the trees. As night fell, the forest transformed. The air cooled, the darkness thickened, and the noises changed. At first, it was the usual sounds, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the wind. But then I noticed something else, something I couldn't quite place. A faint shuffling noise, distant but deliberate. It wasn't the random scampering of a squirrel or the rhythmic call of an insect. It was steady, slow, like someone or something was moving carefully through the woods. I told myself it was just an animal, a deer maybe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The sound wasn't retreating like an animal would. It was getting closer. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight. I swept the beam through the trees, but the light caught nothing unusual. Still, the feeling lingered. I decided to put out the fire, thinking maybe the light was drawing unwanted attention. My tent was only a few feet away, so I climbed inside, zipped it shut, and sat in the darkness, listening. Silence. I stayed still for what felt like an hour, straining to hear anything outside. Finally, exhaustion won and I lay down. Sleep came in restless, shallow waves, my mind on high alert. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a noise, a soft crunch. Close. I froze. My heart pounded in my ears. Someone was outside my tent. I could hear the deliberate steps, slow and careful, moving around my campsite. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. Then the sound of fabric. My backpack, which I had left just outside the tent, being unzipped. I reached for my knife, gripping it so tight my hand hurt. I debated making a noise, scaring whoever it was away. But what if they weren't alone? What if they were armed? My mind raced with possibilities. The zipper stopped. Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate exhale, close to my tent. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, flicked it on, and unzipped the tent in one motion, lunging out with the light and knife in hand. The beam caught nothing. No one. The clearing was empty. My backpack was still there, but the front pocket was open. My water bottle was lying on the ground. I swept the flashlight across the trees, my breath shaky. No movement, no sound. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat up, knife in hand, eyes scanning the darkness. The feeling of being watched never went away. The first light, I packed up my gear as fast as I could. The eerie silence of the night had lifted, replaced by the usual morning sounds. Birds chirping, squirrels rustling through leaves. It should have been comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I wasn't alone. The hike back to my truck felt longer than before. Every snap of a twig, every rustling leaf made my heart jump, but I saw no one. By the time I reached my truck, I was drenched in sweat despite the cool morning air. I threw my gear in the back, got in, and locked the doors. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. As I started the engine, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. On the dirt road behind my truck, where there should have been nothing but my own footprints, there was another set. Fresh, deep, leading from the woods to the back of my truck. I didn't wait to think. I hit the gas and didn't stop until I was miles away. I don't know who was out there with me that night. I don't know what they wanted. And I sure as hell don't plan on ever camping alone again. I don't know why I thought going camping alone was a good idea. Maybe I just wanted to prove something to myself. I'd always considered myself a pretty self-sufficient guy. I could handle being alone in the woods. I grew up hiking, knew how to start a fire, how to filter water, how to stay safe. I figured a solo trip would be peaceful, something different from my normal life, a break from everything. But there's a reason people say not to go into the wilderness alone. I picked a spot deep in the national forest, far from any campsites or other people. That was the whole point. I wanted to be alone. The drive there was easy, just a few hours out of town. I parked off a dirt road and hiked in about 5 miles. It wasn't an official trail, just one I found on an old map. It was overgrown but manageable. The trees were thick, mostly pine, and the air was crisp, the kind of coolness that reminds you you're far from the city. I set up camp in a small clearing near a creek. It was a good spot, flat ground, plenty of wood for a fire, fresh water nearby. I pitched my tent, got a fire going, and cooked some canned food. It was quiet, really quiet, that kind of silence where your own breathing sounds loud. First, it was nice, peaceful, just the sounds of the fire popping, the creek running, the wind moving through the trees. It wasn't until after dark that I started feeling off. I don't know how to describe it. Not scared exactly, just uneasy. The firelight only reached so far, and beyond that, it was just darkness. I kept feeling like something was watching me. Every time I looked into the woods, I expected to see something staring back. but there was nothing, just trees and shadows. I told myself I was being paranoid. That's what happens when you're alone in the woods at night. Your mind plays tricks on you. So I forced myself to ignore it, to focus on the warmth of the fire, the sounds of the creek. I stayed up for a while just listening. Eventually, I convinced myself everything was fine, and I crawled into my tent. I don't know what woke me up. One second I was sleeping, and the next I was wide awake. I didn't hear anything at first, just the usual sounds, crickets, the wind, the creek. But then I noticed something. The fire. It was out. That was strange. I had put enough wood on it before going to bed to last most of the night. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not an animal. I knew what animals sounded like. Deer, raccoons, even bears. This was different. Slow. Deliberate. I stayed completely still, listening. The footsteps stopped. Then the sound of breathing, just outside my tent. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever, or whatever, was out there could hear it. I wanted to reach for my knife, but it was outside, next to the fire pit. My headlamp was in the tent, though. I grabbed it, clicked it on, and shined it through the thin fabric of the tent. Nothing, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something had been there. I stayed awake the rest of the night, barely moving, listening for any sound. Eventually, the sky started to lighten. As soon as it was bright enough to see, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The firewood I had stacked neatly before bed was scattered. My knife was gone, and in the dirt around my campsite were footprints. Not boot prints, bare feet, human. I packed up fast, faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't even eat. I just threw everything into my pack and started hiking back toward my car. The whole way I felt like I was being followed. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, I heard something, twigs snapping, rustling in the brush. But every time I turned around, there was nothing, just empty forest. I've never been so relieved to see my car. I threw my gear in, locked the doors, and took off down the dirt road. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was back on the highway heading home. I don't know who was out there with me that night. I don't know what they wanted. I just know I wasn't alone, and I won't be going back out there alone ever again.